If we look at the fragmentation between self and ego, or self and parts or identities that ego attaches to, how does this occur? Well, shame is the phenomena of dissociation. As a child, as a victim of abuse, receives a certain amount of pain and a subtext of worthlessness, inadequacy, being unwanted. When that's paired with traumatic abuse, it triggers the child's psychology. Traumatic abuse is overwhelming abuse. It's abuse that cannot be resisted, because what makes something traumatic is a very large energy that intersects with a very small energy, which engages the law of mass. The law of mass says that when a pinball encounters a bowling ball heading in opposite directions, I mean, it's a harmonious relationship if they're heading in the same direction. So we're talking about violence, violation. We're talking about opposition. When a pinball interacts with a bowling ball, the law of mass dictates that the smaller object, the pinball, is traumatically violated, is sent flying in the trajectory of the encounter. Right? The original trajectory of the pinball, as it connects with the bowling ball, the geometry of the contact determines where the pinball will go flying. But it's always in a shattering direction. An identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And when a small identity, a child, a victim, interacts violently with a large identity that has the capacity to shatter the identity as well as the capacity to kill the body, the host of the identity. The small identity goes flying, but it goes flying with a subtext, with a message that says you are not worth attuning to. You are not worth honoring. Because the child is going in this direction, the victim is going in this direction. But the abuser, or the larger energy, is going in this direction. Anytime the larger energy chooses not to witness, see, and attune to the smaller energy, but to collide, understanding the law of mass, there is a message of superiority and inferiority. Right? Because that is innate in the law of mass. The superior, the supersize, when it connects with the inferior, the smaller size, the supersize prevails. Right? It is stronger. Right? And so in the sociopathic territory of the psyche, in the reptilian brain, might is right. Strength is goodness. Strength is better. It is better to be strong than it is to be weak. Now, in the empathic paradigm and in the empathic brain, grace, empathy, deference, cooperation, attunement is stronger still, because it is saying that we could use superior mass, we could use the reptilian brain, and we could win using the reptilian operating system. But we could win-win using the empathic operating system. We don't have to dominate. We could cooperate. And cooperation has a greater efficiency and thus a greater intelligence than domination. Right? So in the empathic paradigm, cooperation, attunement, and win-win is superior, is right. But in the empathic operating, or in the sociopathic operating system of the reptilian brain, might is right. Might is right. The victor has God on their side. Both sides pray to God, be with us, give us your strength, and one prevails. The vanquished is not with the grace of God. And the God is the reptilian brain. The God is strength. The strength goes to the strongest, right? Obviously. But in the empathic operating system, God is peace, God is beauty, God is harmony, God is synergy. And so the closest thing to synergistic win-win is what prevails. Now, when an empath and a sociopath encounter one another, it's important to understand that the sociopath is bound to the reptilian operating system by unresolved trauma. If you traumatize a person enough and do not resolve and integrate that trauma, they will be trapped within their reptilian brain. Within the reptilian brain, might is always right. And so there is a dance between the empathic and sociopathic operating systems, which is why the empathic operating system has to be accessed through a position of strength. In other words, if you, as the smaller victim in a sociopathic dynamic, go to the sociopath and say, I know you could easily beat me, but why don't we share power, right? Let's work together, right? And this is usually the person who suggests cooperation is the weak one, right? Not the strong one in a sociopathic paradigm. Only the strongest party in a relationship can transition the relationship into or from the sociopathic paradigm of might makes right and weakness makes wrong to the empathic paradigm. And the reason is that the sociopath only respects superior power. It has contempt for the weakness in themselves and any weakness out there, right? The sociopath has respect for strength or power or domination. So when the most effective predator, when the most dominant person in the dynamic chooses to elevate the dynamic into one of empathy, to enter the empathic territory, the reptile, the person with the sociopathic operating system, will respect it if it has experienced strength. So it goes something like this. You have a duel, right? And this is where the Arthurian mythology covers the psychic territory of reptile to human being, of reptilian operating system, sociopath, to empathic operating system, and the empathic brain to human. Two knights meet in the woods, right? That's the encounter. and they fight. That's the reptilian operating system. And the strongest one prevails. That's the way it is. Whenever you have a fight, right, the fastest, the smartest, the largest wins. That's the way it works. That's the law of mass. So if the sociopath or the sociopathic operating system is not transcended, it's simple. You meet, you battle. The strongest one kills the other one and takes the reputation, the horse, the spoils, the energy of the other, right? Now, in moving towards the, because this was also Christ's kind of metaphor or symbolic transition, right? To move towards forgiving, to move towards empathy, to move towards understanding of one's enemy, right? So we're moving towards the empathic brain in evolution. So if the strongest one serves Christ is God-fearing, serves Christ, worships something more than themselves, right? This is the Arthurian myth. Then the conquered has the ability to beg for forgiveness, to give up the reptilian territory, to forgiveness, to let me live, to not take my things, and acknowledges the stronger might, right? That you are the best of us. I acknowledge you, right? And so this was the way of establishing who serves who. In a dominance hierarchy, you have to serve something, right? Because there's always someone stronger and bigger than you are. But how do you know who you serve and who serves you? Well, in the reptilian territory, it's simple, right? You have a battle with all of your peers, and whoever lives, those are the strong ones. And those that were allowed to live or are willing to swear fealty, they serve the stronger one, right? But then you do battle with other people that are stronger, and you find that some of them beat you, they best you. They are the better man. Why? Their sword was made better. Their sword was longer. Their horse was better bred. Their horse was better fed. Their horse was better rested, right? So they are the better man, defined by strength to kill, to dominate. So that's the pecking order. The king, right? In the most direct expressions of this, dynamic, the king was chosen by being able to kill more people or win more jousts than anyone else. And anyone who wanted to claim kingship could challenge the king to a duel. And if they killed the king, then they were king. If they did not kill the king, then they were beheaded for the challenge, and the king reigned. Right? The king was on top. Now, in the transition, right? So you either kill or are killed in the sociopathic territory, but you have the possibility of moving to the empathic territory by winning the duel, by winning the fight, and showing forbearance. Right? I can kill you, but I don't want to. That is something that a reptile will respect. Right? That is something that the reptilian operating system will respect. Right? I have so much confidence in my power to kill you, and I have demonstrated and I have shown you. Right? I've cut you here, I've cut you there, I've cut you there, I killed your horse, I knocked you down. I knocked you down again. My sword is at your neck. There is no question who is the better man. There is no question who is the superior force, the one with God, the one with power. But I do not kill you, either because you swear fealty, you will serve me, or because I don't want to, right? I care about you. But it is a transition towards empathy from strength. And that must occur for a reptile to learn about the empathic operating system. Because the reptile is in the operating system where whoever is strongest will kill me and take all that I have. And the only way that I can survive is by being stronger. That is what the human child experienced, right? They were born with the capacity for empathy and bonding, and then a series of traumatic events occurred that were unfair, that were unjust, that were cruel, that were sociopathic. Bullying, abuse of power, hypocrisy, deception, rape. These occurred, and the cult was not strong enough to defend the innocent. So the innocent died and was replaced with the reptilian operating system of might is right. If you're in that territory and you say, no, this is wrong, they say, what do you mean? The reptile kills you. Looks around, does anyone else think it's wrong? I've just demonstrated that power, that might is the only thing that matters, right? And so you've learned that every reptile, every person in the sociopathic operating system has learned fundamentally through a passive cult that creates and allows abuse and does not protect its innocent. Every member of the reptilian faith has learned that might makes right, that might is the only God that can be depended on to keep the body alive, to maintain dignity, to maintain fear. That is the message of a cult that creates and allows chronic, traumatic abuse of the vulnerable, of the innocent. So that's how it's learned. It's learned by a more powerful person showing no mercy. And the only way to unlearn it is for a more powerful person to show mercy, right? So the transition is mercy. Show mercy, right? I would have killed you if given the chance, but I ask you to be more human than me, to show mercy to me, even though you can kill me. If that is sincerely asked for and given, there is a transition, at least partially, into the human or empathic operating system. Now, the self dies when it cannot bear to witness sociopathic cruelty. Right? When we look at a child being systemically raped and we turn away, I don't want to see it. I don't want to acknowledge it. I don't want to feel, I don't want to be with that child. That's the self turning away. So this is one way that we separate from the child, or from the part, from the ego part and the self. The self turns away. Now, the self is the group, the circle. When the circle turns away, right? Now, you see this in the mythology of the virgin and the dragon. Right? There's the mythology that a fierce dragon, i.e. the reptilian brain, comes into the village and demands that starts ravaging and destroying the village. It starts burning a lot, etc. The reptilian brain, the sociopathic impulse, enters town as a large force and starts destroying the town. And because it is the largest force, a dragon, everyone goes into flight and into freeze and into please rather than into fight. Now, they may start trying to fight, but if everyone who attacks the dragon dies, then they move into flight and freeze. It is a traumatic event. Flight, freeze, and appeasement, or please. Right? So the villagers go into appeasement. They go to the dragon. What do you want? What do we have to sacrifice? What do we have to do? How do we have to prostitute ourselves so that you will not destroy our town? The dragon dictates terms. Every week or every month, you must send a virgin girl to this rock. You must chain her there, and I will eat her. That's the story, right? You must give up some of your innocence. You must feed me with your innocence, and I will get stronger, and your innocence will die. And when the villagers turn away from that girl on the rock at night, and when she sees that she has been given to the dragon, and when the townspeople all say, we give this innocent girl to the dragon, there is the shame of the self, right? Who are we? What kind of animals would give their own children to death to protect themselves? Is that a human being? You see, a human being would fight and die to protect the child who is innocent. Right? What makes a knight? When you have the damsel in distress, the one that says, oh no, that's too big of an enemy, you better die. No. What makes a knight, what makes a hero, is I risk my life to protect the innocent. This is why it's an inverted flip of the reptilian, sociopathic edict. The serpent god says that you fight what is smaller than you and that you can win. You run from what is bigger than you, right? And you focus on yourself. You are sociopathic. You're not worried about other people. You're not worried about the planet. You're not worried about any other life form. Just you. That's what makes you a reptile. That's what bows to the reptilian deity, the reptilian brain. Right? But the knight is the transition to that. No, I will risk my life to rescue you. Right? And so this is the mythology of King or Saint George. What makes him a saint is Saint George would rather risk his life to protect the innocent, to protect the damsel, the virgin. He will risk his life to kill the dragon, knowing that he may not survive. In other words, the reptile avoids death by becoming sociopathic. The saint faces or confronts death, faces death, knows that there is maybe a 60% chance, maybe a 90% chance that he will die, but he would rather die to protect the honor of innocence, to protect the honor of humanity, of the human brain, because it is only the human brain, the empathic brain, that makes sacrifice, that makes sacred, that is willing to face death in service of a higher God of love. A higher God that honors the bond within the species, that honors the blood ties within the species and fights with a dragon. Right? So if he wins, if St. George wins, it's also St. Michael, right? There's different stories of this. If St. Michael, if St. George, right, the dragon slayer, if they win, the innocence lives. If they die with the innocence, right? So there's an acknowledging of the tie of innocence, right? That is the mythological transition, right? So the villagers sacrifice their innocence to stay alive. The human, the saint, gives up their life, risks their life to protect the innocence. It is a transitional myth from the reptilian brain to the empathic brain, with the empathic operating system. Now, the empathic operating system is defined by two questions. This is crude, but it is the simplest way to differentiate the reptile and the empath. Who is in the most pain? That's important. That's the basis of empathic engagement. Who is in the most pain? Who is in the most risk? Who is the most vulnerable? Right? So you establish that first. If you are in empathic territory, your number one question is who is in the most pain? Right? Now, we know we're not in the empathic territory when 10,000 people a day drive by our homeless, because we all know they are in more pain than we are in our homes. Every day we drive by, we stab a knife in the empathic brain, and we identify with reptiles. A reptile has no interest in the homeless. They're too weak. They can't do anything about it, right? Just ignore them. But an empath, their number one question, who is in the most pain in the system, in the circle? And the second question is, how can we help? The empath is in the land of we. The sociopath is in the land of I. I don't want to. I don't care. The empath is in the land of we, right? Because someone who will fight and die for the group also expects the group to show up and die for them, right? If you're in the empathic operating system, you expect the support of your group, and you are willing to die for your group, for your circle. And the virgin, the young woman, is the most vulnerable. So the child and the female, the child and the female is more vulnerable than the adult male, right? So the young female virgin is the symbol of the most weak, the most vulnerable person in the circle. And so the empath, St. George, St. Michael, the hero, the knight, their job is to lay down their life, if necessary, to protect the life of the innocent, the virgin, the young, the small one, the girl. That's the code. of the empathic brain. And the job of the circle that wants to move towards humanity, towards being human, is to support the night. That's the part of the group that has decency, that has courage, that is willing to make sacred the circle. The circle is not sacred with I. I don't care. I don't want this. I want that. Who cares about what you all want? I want this. The circle is not sacred without sacrifice. And the greatest sacrifice, and that's why it's symbolized, the greatest sacrifice of all is to be willing to die, to cease existing as an I, for the service, for the benefit of the group. And an intelligent group and an empathic group honors the hero, honors the sacrifice. A sociopathic group belittles the hero, the heroine. A sociopathic group says, well, you go off and help the poor. I'm not doing that. I'm buying another house. You go off and help the poor. You go off and take a controversial political... You go ahead and commit political suicide. I'm not doing that, right? I know what my angry mob wants to hear, and I'm going to give it to them, and I'm going to win, says the sociopathic politician. Right? The empathic politician says, this is the right thing. This is the right thing for my people. Right? And I'm not going to buy into fear and greed and this and that and the other. I'm going to do the right thing for the people. But what if you're an empathic leader in a sociopathic mob? Doesn't want to hear the right thing. Wants revenge. It wants this, it wants that, right? The ego separates from the self when the self cannot bear to look at the cruelty of its own reptilian brain. I can't bear to think, to see that I did that. I was overwhelmed by my reptilian brain. I was angry, and I killed that person. I left my child because I couldn't face the humiliation of their anger at me for not being a good dad. I left him. And I don't want to face it. Right? So we've got the self. I don't want to look at my shadow. Now, we have a similar thing with the self looking at a family member, right? Some religious dogmas say that anyone who has sex with their same gender. If you love the other gender, that's cool. If you love your own gender, nope. That's unforgivable, apparently, right? So we're going to disown you. We're not going to look at you. You come to visit, we turn away because you're so horrible in our eyes that we do not acknowledge our relationship, our connection to you. Other times it's done with a murderer in the family. Murdering is so horrific, so bad, so this, so that we do not want to acknowledge you are part of this family. You come, we accept it, but you know you're not welcome. We do not honor our relationship with you. Right? So there's a dissociation from the self. You're not wanted. And when the identity, when either inside or outside, has no place to give the burden and be released of the traumatic weight that led them into the cult shadow, right? They take on the unworthiness, the unforgivability, the smallness, the unlovability that the cult gives to them because the cult is too big and they're too small and no one is standing up and honoring the connection. So they turn away and they say, I'm bad, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable. That's just the way it is. So this is the dynamic. When the self and the part become separate, right? Both are lost. Right? The self can no longer exert influence on a part it shuns or dissociates from. Right? They've shown this in countries, right? We say that we're going to have an embargo on Iran, on Cuba, right? And yet we freeze cultures in time when we dissociate from them as a world, right? The world is the self. The country is a part. When the self, when the dominant power turns away from a part, that country freezes in time, right? You look at travel videos of Cuba in the 1920s and people say it's like the 1950s. You go back here, it's like the 1950s. It is frozen in time. When the self, when the dominant personality in the psyche turns away from some part of itself and says, I don't want to look at you, I don't like you, you were weak, I turn away from you. You were cruel, I turn away from you, right? So it doesn't matter the reason. What matters is the dissociation from a dominant part of the psyche with a minority part of the psyche that is banished, right? When the president fires the trade secretary to cover up the embarrassment of a presidential decision, right? This is the way the power structure works, right? In real leadership, the trade secretary makes a mistake and the leader says, you know, it's my fault. I hired this trade secretary, I supervised them or didn't. I made the wrong decision in my hire. I didn't supervise well enough. I didn't tell any of you in the public what was going on in the situation. I was, you know, and then this mistake happened and all of you got hurt. I failed as your leader. Would you like my resignation? That's leadership. And if the public says, yes, I'd like your resignation, I think this part of us would be a better leader, right? You have a transition of power. A sociopathic leader takes no shame. They make a mistake, they fire one of their innocent people. They make another mistake, they fire another one. But they pretend to be innocent and above all that, right? They throw one person after another under the bus. So you're in sociopathic territory, right? You just hope that you can ingratiate yourself enough with the sociopath that you're the last to be thrown under the bus. But you know when you're dealing with a sociopath that everyone would be thrown under the bus. The country and every single friend and deputy will be thrown under the bus, and the sociopath will only care about themselves, right? If they're left standing and everyone else is under the bus, they're fine, right? Because that's the sociopathic operating system. So when the self turns away, or the projected self, because this is not real self-energy, but it's more when the dominant part, the abuser, the bigger one, turns away from the smaller one. There is a perceived, the smaller one takes it that God, that the self has rejected me. And the smaller one takes that in and can no longer access mercy, forgiveness, no longer feels worthy. Right? But similarly, the one that turns away from another does not feel worthy either, right? Because in the code of turning away, there's symmetry, right? And so if someone else ever has more power than me, they will throw me under the bus too, and I'm going to throw you under the bus, right? And so you end up with when you have a weak self dynamic and a strong sociopath dynamic, you end up projecting God and self onto the strongest parts in the cult, the strongest parts in the psyche, and the smallest parts feel unworthy because the larger parts are not blessing and integrating with them. And the largest parts feel unworthy because they know that they will throw everyone under the bus, and so their projection is not of God or the self, a transcendent force. Their projection is of a bigger bully that they are terrified of and that they understand needs to throw them under the bus if given the chance, right? And so you have this fight, and there's no self present, there's no love present, there's no God present in that entire conversation. And the small parts are frozen in time at the point that they were banished, at the point that they were given the weight of the cult, at the point that they were dissociated from, at the point that they were scapegoated by the circle. That's the point they stop evolving, stop moving, they become frozen in time. And so I started this kind of looking at the tension between self and parts and when they become dissociated. But that's because I'm so dissociated from myself that confusion is possible. Meaning it took talking through this whole process to realize I wasn't actually talking about the self when I talk about the bully, right? The judge that condemns someone to 10 years in prison is not the self, right? In the political system, right? The president that throws people under the bus is not the self, right? The global ego of sociopathic countries that banish and punish and seek revenge on other countries is not the self. The self was lost before words. When traumatic biology arrested the development of the human animal into a human being and imprisoned them in a reptilian state, right? Where the highest deity is the ability to kill and frighten other people if they do not do what is desired, right? We live in a world where whether you're in a democracy or a dictatorship, you understand that there is a good chance that you will be financially, emotionally, socially, and physically ruined if you stand between someone in power and their power. That is a reptilian world, right? When President Biden would willingly let an intern fall apart, be discredited, rather than acknowledge the sexual harassment, right? Or when President Clinton would willingly allow the life of Monica Lewinsky to go under all kinds of pressure rather than lose power. Or when the Democratic Party would rather shush up the witnesses of their candidate rather than lose power. You're in sociopathic territory. When Trump would rather destroy the entire electoral fabric than lose power, you're in sociopathic territory. When the party would rather support a winner than someone that has anything to do with their stated values, you're in sociopathic territory. You're in reptilian territory that's masked as belief in principles, right? We say we're a Christian, like we're a Christian party, but we're quite happy to support rapists, racists, lies, upheaval of our institutions as long as they win. Right? We're in reptilian territory. We're not in empathic territory. Right? So this is the crisis, right, in the transition between the reptilian operating system and the human operating system, which has been under discussion as a species for the last 2,000 years. Right? The mythology of Christ, the mythology of Buddha, right? It's a conversation between, do we pray to the reptilian God or do we pray to the empathic God? And as a traumatized culture, right, many of us do not understand. Right? I didn't get it as clearly as I do now, that we're not actually in conversation with the self at all. Right? Too much reptilian trauma dissociates the ego from the self so that it can enter a survival mode of fight, flight, freeze, and please in a reptilian environment. But the self unconditionally loves, the self unconditionally blesses all sides when welcomed in. When we heal the traumatic load that leads us to fear death, that leads us to believe that to go into these feelings is to court death, when we overcome that traumatic load and emerge out of the reptilian brain into the empathic brain, we are able to be forgiven and forgive. We are able to ask for mercy and receive it. We are able to make mistakes and not be punished. We are able to love who we are as an imperfect expression of all that is and to love others who are imperfect. We are able to see our imperfections and forgive them, rather than see our imperfections and hide them, knowing they will not be forgiven by the reptiles around us. Right? And this is the journey. This is the work of our species at this time. Because the reptilian brain kept us alive and helped us thrive in our animal history. But as we become more and more efficient with technology, while remaining in the self-centered, narcissistic, ego, and reptilian operating system, we threaten not only our own survival, not only our children's survival, but the entire planet's survival. The very thing that helped us get to this point is now the thing that threatens to kill us. And that is the history of life. A trait emerges in a certain environment, and it prevails as the environment continues to change. If it doesn't change or doesn't subside, the very thing that kept us alive becomes the greatest threat to our survival, right? The ability to breathe underwater as we emerged and crawled out onto the land. If we retained that and did not learn something new, right, we'd still be fish. Right? So, a journey for our species at this time.